And I have been a commitment phobe, It has to do with my own childhood history, is that to commit something is to invite pain and rejection, which goes back
Interesting.
to being 1 year old and being given to a stranger by my mother to save my life. And I didn't see her for 6 weeks, 5 or 6 weeks. So to open your heart and to be committed means to be hurt. You know, I'm not making excuses. I'm saying that's how it worked for me. I've learned commitment. So your mother gave you beautiful advice, but I've had to learn that over time. The good news I can tell you, Tom, is the beauty does not go away. That should your marriage come to 51 years, as mine has, you'll be looking into your wife's eyes and you'll be seeing the same beauty that you saw the first day you met her. It's going to be amazing. So it's not like that. It's not like all those wrinkles. A wonderful opportunity to learn about yourself and about life if you're willing to be curious. and that it's not 50-50. It's 100%. It's 100%. So you're each 100% responsible for how you show up. And every difficulty we've ever had has been a powerful learning experience. And this is where the commitment to truth comes in, because that's one thing we've shared, is that it's not easy to give up your point of view and your grievance and your stance, but there's a deep payoff when you do that. So that the marriage is just the most wonderful school there is for development, if you're willing to look at it like that, and if when you need the help, if you're willing to get the help to look at it that way. It's also, which goes back to a lot of my work, is that any deep pain that you're experiencing is you confusing the present moment for the past. So that in a marriage, you're going to get triggered. But when you think of a trigger, it's a very small little thing. And what's much more important is the ammunition and the explosive that the trigger sets off. And guess what? Who's carrying the ammunition, the explosive? You are. So you can focus on the trigger. She said this, or he said that, or they didn't say that, they didn't do that. Or you can focus on, oh, what's exploding inside me, and how long have I been carrying this? So it takes that curiosity and the willingness to look at yourself.
Speaking of trauma and how we're carrying around that explosive charge, are there universals to healing from trauma? What can they do to begin to heal?
So there's many healing paths, but my own approach can be summed up in 2 words, and it's also the title of a course that I teach for therapists and so on. And talking about the name, compassionate inquiry. So if you can be curious, the inquiry part is the curiosity part. I reacted that way. Oh, why did I react that way? Not why did I react that way? That's not compassionate. I reacted that way. I felt its pain. I felt overwhelmed. I felt hatred. I felt rage. I felt despair. What is that about? So you have to have that curiosity, and you have to have the compassion to look at yourself not through that voice that tells you that you're worthless, but to say, if I reacted that way, there must be a good reason for it. Something in me. There's something happened to me that made me react that way at some point. So rather than putting oneself down or thinking that if I have problems, it means I'm deficient, have the curiosity to look into it and the compassion to not to judge yourself for it. And that both can be learned. Both the curiosity and the compassion can be learned. And any good therapist, any person you work with, whether they call it compassion inquiry, whether they call it something else, whatever they work with, those two attitudes will be embedded in their approach if they're going to be helpful to you. So compassionate curiosity, I think, is the key. Yeah, that's not very difficult because it shows up in the present. And I do that with people all the time. So
they don't need the why. They just need to know that they are reacting that way.
Well, it's not difficult to get them to see that what they think is a reaction to the present is actually a reaction to the past. This is without any recall, because there's all kinds of memory, and the body carries memory even if it doesn't carry recall. And a lot of things that have happened to people happened before they had conscious recall. So in my work, I don't find it difficult to drill down to what is it that people are carrying in the present, and it's just a simple exercise that I do with people. So that what I'm saying, but to make it long story short, the past shows up in the present all the time.
Why is that? Why is that they don't hear a single lecture on trauma?
Well, Western medicine in general separates the mind from the body, so that when you go see a physician, they'll look at the physical symptoms, and I was trained as a physician. I know what I'm talking about. We were trained to look at the physical symptoms and the physical findings, including the ones identifiable on various tests. We're never asked to link those symptoms and those conditions to a person's emotional life. It's like the two are separate. So if you go to a doctor with psoriasis, the link between psoriasis and childhood trauma is really clear. But nobody's going to ask you about trauma. Nobody's going to ask you about how you feel about yourself, about how you stress yourself. Same with rheumatoid arthritis. The link between rheumatoid arthritis and childhood trauma is scientifically really well established. Not only the coincidence of the two, but also the scientific or the physiological pathways by which emotional stress affects your immune system so as to trigger rheumatoid arthritis. Yeah, we don't hear about that mind-body link. So that's the first point. The second point is a lot of doctors themselves are traumatized before they go into medical school. If they weren't before they went to medical school, they're going to be sorely challenged when they do go to medical school, but nobody talks about that either.
You talked about loneliness as well as being the outcome of many of the problems that we see today in our modern society, in Western society, like a lack of connection.
Well, there's been an epidemic of loneliness that's been growing in the last 40 years. Significantly. So loneliness is as much of a risk factor for disease as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And that's because for early death and disease and lowered immunity beings, we are what has been called biopsychosocial creatures, which means that our biology is inseparable from our psychology, which in turn is inseparable from our social interactions. And those people that are isolated and lonely, as people increasingly are in this competitive, individualistic, consumer capitalist culture, more people are getting sick as a result of that loneliness. So loneliness is both an effect of a certain culture, but it's also the cause of further suffering.
I grew up in Toronto, immigrant family, Italian background.
Yeah.
And Italians, and not just, but it was in my experience, but Italians were at that time mocked because of how many cousins they have and how many family members are in their life. So the people that were not Italian around us in the community would point out that it was weird that we had so many cousins. That it was weird that we had so many family functions. That you got to be your own man. I'm talking about as an 8, 9, 10-year-old. I miss those days when I had so many people around, and I remember having a sense, as like my friends, a sense of confidence
Well, if you talk to indigenous people, that's how they used to grow up. So they talk to their grandmothers, their cousins, their uncles. Like I have an indigenous friend, and like 80 cousins. And I have 2 cousins with whom I'm barely in contact. And generally, people from Italian, Portuguese, Spanish, all the Romance languages, Southern, they tend to have these relationships. Indigenous people tend to have these relationships, and these relationships promote health, is what they do. And actually, what happens is, as people get, like, for example, multiple sclerosis used to be much more common in the northern latitudes. So they thought it was weather. But now it's actually happening more in the southern latitudes. Why? Because people are getting more lonely, more isolated. So these links are real.
Well, that's interesting. The quick small case study, I had a second cousin of mine who's 15 years older than me, and she passed away about 10 years ago from MS. And she was the only cousin that I knew that grew up as the only child. And they lived further away from the rest of the relatives. So she didn't have that interaction. I wonder if that was an input.
I'll tell you something else about her.
Mm-hmm.
She was a people pleaser. She had trouble saying no. She had difficulty being angry in a healthy way. She tended to believe that she was responsible for other people feel, and she put other people's needs ahead of her own.
100%.
And I've never met anybody with MS who doesn't have those personality traits. And I'm not blaming the individual, but these are the results of what happened to them in childhood. And so again, it's an example of the mind-body unity, which is in actual fact, in actual life, inextricable. And we also know, like, if somebody comes to me with MS, I should, as a physician, and I would, if I was still in practice, offer them whatever physiological treatment is necessary. But I would also talk to them about how they live their lives and how they feel about themselves and what stresses they take on and how they take on the stresses of other people and ignore their own health and their own needs. Because if they understood that, they could actually effectively stop the progression of their illness. And Jeff Rediger, when we talked about, he wrote this book called Cured, which I'm sure he talked to you about, which is about these so-called spontaneous remissions, where people are given a death sentence of a diagnosis, and lo and behold, 20 years later, they're still alive. And Jeff researched, what is it that these people did? And these remissions, it turns out, are not spontaneous at all. They have to do with people taking agency and really looking after them. And the biggest change that people seem to undergo is a different relationship to themselves. And so I found the same thing. I talk about it in the Myth of Normal. I talk to people with MS who no longer have symptoms without any medications, And so this is not miracle. This is not voodoo, and it's not accident. It's because the mind and the body cannot be separated. And your psychology has everything to do with your physiology. It's not your fault. You didn't ask to have your psychology develop in a certain way. That happened in an environment that you didn't choose, that you were born into. But it has impacts. And again, medical practice, despite all the science, never looks at that.